back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Before I go any further, I want to thank my friend Dave Knoll at MOI for hooking this desk up, because I'm actually standing and my back's been killing me again. It's football season. We're carrying. And you know what? Here to fix everything, because I've been talking politics and business and leadership. We're just going to go back to like football. It's football season. I'm getting on a plane, going to Las Vegas. This guy may have never thought that was possible. And to give him a little Baltimore kiss and a throwback to San Diego, I've decided to wear the throwback powder blues, not all of my Allers, but the old San Diego Superchargers. Clark Judge covered the Baltimore Colts back when I was a youngin' here in Baltimore, and was a scribe whom I read at the San Diego Union Tribune for many years, when I would wake up in my Aunt Jane's place out on Leo Street by San Diego State and College Avenue, and I'd open the paper, read about Tony Gwynn, I'd read Tom Krasovic, I'd read, Buster Olney back when he was a youngster. Right. Clark, how are you? I miss you. We haven't talked enough football. It feels like it's been 2 years since I've had you on the show, because it has been. Welcome, man. We've been friends a long time. It's great to have you on, man.
Yeah, nice to be back, Nestor, and nice to be talking to Baltimore people again. It has been too long.
Well, I got my Inner Harbor. By the way, if you want to buy my condo, call Jeff Moeller, Moeller and Gary. We cut the price again. Please come buy it. My wife wants outdoor space and have our coffee out on an outdoor deck. Clark, Baltimore, and memories. Give a little bit of your background, because when I introduce my old buddies and stuff, how do you know this guy? I would say I knew Clark Judge's name from reading your work, but then all I ever wanted to be was Ken Rosenthal. All I ever wanted to be was John Stedman. That's in my whole life. Oscar Madison. That was my thing. That's all I chased. So I knew about you as a writer, but I worked at the Evening Sun. I began there in 1986. And everyone there knew of you from having worked. There was so much inbreeding between the News American, the Evening Sun, the Morning Sun. Everybody knew everybody and worked with everybody. And you were one of those guys that got spit out and came back to me much, much later in life when we got a football team here again.
Yeah, no, it's funny, because that's one of the reasons I left, is that in 1984, the Colts were gone. So my beat was gone, essentially.
You were there for all the madness, right? You were there at the end.
Yeah. Oh, sure. No, I was there at the end. And at that point, I think you talked about the News American. Mike Marlowe was on his way over there. Jack Gibbons came a little bit later. I know all those those persons' names. And the News American, when it closed down, sent a lot of people over the Sun. And then the Sun merged with the Morning Sun and became the Baltimore Morning Sun. But the Evening Sun, I worked at from 79 through 84. And when I got there, I was doing desk work, and then became the Scholastic sports editor for 1 year. And then they called me on a Wednesday night before the start of the ACC basketball tournament and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm watching TV." And they said, "Get on a plane and go down to Greensboro." And I said, "Why?" They go, "You've got to cover the ACC basketball tournament."
So say 81, 82. What year is this?
Had to
Buck Williams?
It had to be 80, 81. Yeah, it had to be 80, 81. It had to be
Dutch Morley?
The spring of 81. Had to be the spring of 81.
Reggie Jackson?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right?
All right.
That's right. Philadelphia. And so they said,
Catholic.
"Get on a plane." And I went, "What's going on?" The beat writer was sick, couldn't go. So I said, "I don't know anything about Maryland basketball. I watch them, but I don't know. It doesn't matter. Go." So I went down there and covered the tournament. And the last day of the tournament, there had 10 inches of snow in Greensboro, which will paralyze any place south of Baltimore.
They don't have a plow.
And it did, but they still played the game. And I came back and they said, "You did such a great job that we're putting you on Maryland next year." I went, "What?" They were putting me on Lefty Drizel and the Terps, 81, 82. So I did that. Adrian Branch, team, and they were 16 and 13. They weren't very good. Charles Pittman, but it was interesting. Covering Lefty.
Herman Veal.
Yeah, Herman Veal. Covering Lefty was Jeff Adkins was another player. Covering Lefty was a trip.
I know, Hell, I don't know.
Right, that's right. And so then from there, Jim Miller leaves, and he was covering the Colts, and they said, we want you to cover the Colts the next year. So it was this dramatic rise here. All of a sudden, I'm covering the Baltimore Colts in '82. I said, wait a minute, I mean, I just got my feet wet with the Terps. I'm sort of getting used to it. No, you're covering the Colts now. So I cover the Frank Kush Colts in the strike season. And actually it was a great baptism for me, because 2 games into the season, there was a strike, and it was a 57-day strike. And I got to meet a lot of writers around the country then. And that really helped in terms of the future, and getting sources, and also getting guys that I really respected and got to know as friends. So from there, I covered the Colts in '82. They were 08-1, and it was eventful only because of Frank Kush and Holden Smith and all the things that maybe some of your listeners know about.
Well, I should say Clark Judge is our guest here. Clark, you've come into my life a bunch the last couple of weeks, whether it was dining with Chip Namias, who was the old Houston Oilers PR guy, who I knew as a kid, who was very, very kind to me 30 years ago. And we've had a lifetime of friendship. And you were this weird name, but like you start dropping Frank Kush stuff on me here in the middle of all of this. I mean,
well, wait, what happened, Nestor, was
Art Schlichter was released from prison this week, by the way. So that's it. That's the.
Oh, I didn't say that.
Art Schlichter. So that you were involved in that, right?
Yeah, I was covering when he and Pagel were the quarterbacks, and Schlichter had his locker moved next to the telephone booth, and everyone said, when they had telephone booths, people were going, what are they talking about? But they had next to the telephone, and they said, that's because he gets so many dates. He's talking to all these girls. Well, he wasn't talking to girls. He's talking to gamblers, but nobody knew that. But Pagel was the quarterback. He was good on not great, but good on a bad team. And so then in '83, Ken Murray, who used to be at the News American, comes back from Texas, and they said, we're going to put him on the Colts. And I said, wait a minute, you just told me he had a good year. Yeah, we're putting him on the Colts, putting you in the NFL. That was fun for me, because I got to travel the country, went up and had a one-on-one with Bradshaw up in Pittsburgh, went out San Diego, saw John Elway line up behind guard against the Chargers. But after that year, I realized I don't really think I've got a future here, because Ken's doing the Colts. There's no NFL beat per se. What am I going to do? And we had a new sports editor in there who was just a great guy, Mike Davis, great guy. And he said,
Mike Davis put me on the rock and roll beat. Mike Davis was the reason I sat down with Paul Stanley and David Bowie. And yes.
Yeah, great guy. Great. And so anyway, I had an opportunity to go to San Diego covering the Chargers. And he was trying to work out something in the sun, and it didn't work out. And I'll never forget, it was a Thursday. I came in there and I said, well, what's going on? Because I really wanted to stay in Baltimore. I really did. And he said, you got to go to San Diego. And I went, what? He said, I can't work out anything here. You should try it. And if it doesn't work out, I'll guarantee you got a spot coming back here. So I went out there, covered the Chargers for 10 years. Best move of my life. Loved it out there. Moved up for 6 years covering the 49ers. That was a better move for me. Loved being around that team. And then went on to CBS and Fox, and then started my own thing here with Talk of Fame Network. So long way of saying that, I had a wonderful career that started in Baltimore.
Yeah, Baltimore. Clark Judge is here. Again, you just showed up, and the Schlichter thing last week and all of this, but here we are, right? So I'm chasing down old friends this week. I haven't had as much sports. I did a lot of crab cake eating back in August. They were all delicious. I gained weight. I'm trying to get into Planet Fitness and get into shape here. But Ravens, Raiders, I had to think about this because I got Amy Trask coming on this week. I got Rod Woodson joining us later on this week. And I'm thinking of, I'm going to call Rich Gannon or Tony Saragusa or whatever. We can't call Al Davis at this point, so I'm calling Amy. But I'm thinking, Ghost to the Post. I was at that game. There was just a shooting on a corner where I waited for a bus for 3 hours. It never came on Christmas Eve that night with my dad. It was Christmas Eve, 1977. So I think Ghost to the Post and Casper and like that's Baltimore, Oakland. Even before that, 1970 AFC Championship game. But I wasn't around for that. But they kicked off our existence as the Ravens back in 1996, and Vinny showed up and Ray Lewis in black pants a couple of weeks ago. It's amazing as these passages of time. But I'm getting on a plane to go to Las Vegas. Your wife worked in the league, right? Like you knew Pete Rozelle, Clark. That's one of the reasons I wanted to reach to you. I'm reaching to Jason Cole and some other people this week, scratching our heads saying, you've been around this a long time. we've just entered a whole different, we're just in a different place now. It's like
Yeah.
when you hit hyperspace on, on asteroids, we're just in a different place for what the league is doing and how they're making money and where the gambling thing's going. And I guess I might as well start this with a mask on in the middle of a plague in Las Vegas, right?
Hey, why not? And it's funny you mentioned Ghost of the Post. I think today is Burt Jones's 70th birthday. And Burt Jones was a guy that I loved to watch play. And to me, one of the most underrated
We could just stop the
quarterbacks of
show
all
right now
time.
and have you tell me Burt Jones stories, and that would
Oh,
make
yeah.
this week,
I,
because like I love every time I see Burt, I'm like a kid.
yeah,
You
me
know what I
too.
mean?
Me
So
too.
I loved Burt. I always loved Burt. Yeah, Burt can do no wrong in this town.
Yeah, he can do no wrong with me either. I said next to Unitas, Burt Jones is my favorite quarterback. I loved watching him play. He's so charismatic, and he lifted that team and carried him on his
But you
shoulders.
didn't cover him.
I did, no, but I covered him at the end. I mean, I was there at the end just before he got traded, because I'd go out and they'd say, do the Colts today, do something on Landry, do something on Jones, do something. And so I'd go out there and I'd see him. And
He's the biggest star in town
oh,
at
no
that point,
question,
right?
no question. And he was one of the biggest stars in the country. I mean, his picture was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He was a guy who just had a magnetic personality and image. I mean, people they couldn't get enough of Burt Jones. But anyway, that's a long way of saying I really miss Burt Jones, but here he is having a birthday today. But yeah, Las Vegas and the Raiders and the hockey's out there now. It's such a different world because everyone's looking for revenue generating sources. And so they go to an untapped market, which is Las Vegas, which Pete Rozelle never, ever would have gone to. Paul Tagliabue the same way. But I think there's been a dramatic shift in since we've talked about Rozelle, that's a long time ago. Tagliabue, not so much, but dramatic shift in that period of time to today, because the Jerry Joneses and the Daniel Snyder have become owners. And Jerry Jones is a guy who got into the Pro Football Hall of Fame primarily because of his marketing skills. And he's a guy who turned the NFL upside down with marketing. And I'll guarantee you, he's a guy that said, go into Las Vegas, untapped market. This is something you got to look into. And so the NFL has, but to think that would have happened, when we were around 40 years ago or so, no, there's no way. They just said, there's no way we're going into the betting capital of the United States.
Clark Judge and I spent a significant amount of time together for better part of 2 decades, the beginning of the century, going to whether it was combines, Super Bowls, owners meetings, big football games. The Ravens played in a lot of big football games. I spent a lot of time together during that period. And to think of where when you talk about Jerry, I sat at that meeting when they were going to move the Rams, when they're going to move the Chargers, where they're going to move the Raiders, where are they going to move them? I wasn't around for the Ravens getting into this thing, but famously Tagliabue built a museum, all that went down with Jacksonville and Nashville and in Cleveland in that generation. Now we're to the point where there's a Super Bowl out in LA. That stadium exists in Inglewood. It exists primarily because of Jerry Jones just sort of shooting down everybody in the room, because that thing was meant for Carson and or for out in the middle of the woods. It is fascinating how the power brokers move all of this. And even, and I'll talk to Amy Trask about this, what the Raiders wound up getting and what Al Davis's kid financially and what Nevada and the Strip and all that's on the hook. And I guess for old farts like you and me, it's really weird to sit and watch baseball games, that nobody cares about, nobody's going through, nobody's watching. But the whole premise is to have this hot blonde chick try to get me to gamble on baseball. And I'm like, it's a little odd, you know what I mean? And that's cool. But you and I are cultured enough to know that they've been gambling in Europe on sports behind the section where they get a beer and a bratwurst and a pretzel forever. And over here, it's been frowned upon. Can you play like granddad for me and tell me all the things that might still go wrong here? Because I still look at this and say, woo, it's a party. Till the referee gets bought off on an email or threatened, or there's just all sorts of underworld play here that's ugly.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. And I think the reason you mentioned that is that there has been some of that in the past. I think, didn't the NBA have some kind of scandal involving?
I know a guy named Tim Donaghy, right? I know his name because
that's right.
I know Shoeless Joe, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so it's funny you mentioned that because we did an interview with Mike Pereira last week on that very subject. And he said the NFL has gone to great pains to make sure that doesn't happen. He explained it in a long and roundabout way, but it was instructive as to what they was doing to make sure that there's nothing of that going on. It doesn't mean you can't prevent it, that you can prevent it. I mean, because people do what they're going to do. And some, either an athlete or official, whatever, if he's going to make a lot of money and sees that there's a chance of making a lot of money, may be tempted. But it just, play the old fogey. I understand what's going on. I was raised in a culture where the people that I trusted and looked up to and interviewed and on a regular basis, I'm talking about owners, commissioners, GMs, they would never get anywhere near Las Vegas. Now, I understand that's not the case today. And what you mentioned is absolutely right. What goes on in Europe's absolutely right. But could it happen here in terms of, more of throwing of games, that sort of thing? Yeah, we've had it in the past. I mean, Paul Tagliabue played in a basketball game at Georgetown with the opponents. Shaved points. So I mean, it can happen, and so I just think if you can reduce any kind of temptations, the fact that they're there, I don't know that increases the temptations. I just know I never looked at Las Vegas as sort of a major league town to put the Raiders in. The Raiders always to me were the Oakland Raiders. When they moved to LA, they got to go back to Oakland. Same with the Rams, got to go back to LA, even though Cleveland people say get them back to Cleveland. But there's just something that doesn't sound right about the Las Vegas Raiders. I guess if any team was going to move there, it should have been them. But something just doesn't sound right there. But yeah, in terms of just being of my age and ilk, does it concern me? It doesn't concern me. But I think all bets are off, to be honest with you. All bets are off.
Well, I had a great segment last month. Danny Funt wrote a piece. I'm trying to think of Columbia Journalism Review.
Yeah, sure.
And it was about inside information that a guy like you or a guy like La Confor's had that job, Schefter, information on draft picks, on things that people can wager on now for lots and lots of money, very, very easily with a click across the Jersey state line. It sounds like a Springsteen song. But knowing all of that, everything's sort of like in play, insider information now in regard to betting on stuff. And it's just not my jam. You know what I mean? It's not why I got into sports. It's not a part that I want to talk about. Even the fantasy part, I just thought to be like, I can't talk about it. Whether it was rotisserie, I played a hell of a lot of Stratomatic baseball, Clark, but I didn't think it was a radio topic.
So did I.
I mean? Yeah,
so did I.
I mean, I blew the die. I liked all of that, right? But I would say at this point, I still like my town provincial football. Right. My town wants to kick Pittsburgh's ass, and we're worried about Cleveland and what's my quarterback doing. And now, we got vaccination issues with our quarterback. We're going to have that throughout the league. I mean, there's drama on top of drama on top of drama. And now you're going to throw the league putting propositions to bet in the middle of all of it while trying to say nothing at press conferences about injuries. It's just HIPAA this and vaccine that. I don't know how anybody bets on it. I really don't. I mean, I think it's crazy, but I do think that this part of the bubbling up of what it's really about for younger people, it's fantasy, which is betting, right? I mean, it is, and that's the reason it's there. You want to win money, win prizes, win whatever it is. And then I don't know that every little kid in Baltimore is growing up raving as much as they're on their phone trying to figure out how to win, whatever win is. It's a different proposition for me, and I think it's played differently. And I think over the last couple of years, I'm seeing and feeling it, especially as I move away from it, because COVID, I haven't been around a football player in 2 years, Clark. So I'm just examining it from the outside right now as a consumer.
Well, it's funny you asked the question because you started this segment when we were talking about Art Schlichter. Art Schlichter is in prison because he couldn't stop gambling. And so I'm with you on this. I mean, I sort of naively went into sports reporting, many, many decades ago, thinking that it's a game. I know it's a business, but it's more than anything else. It's a game, and I love watching it. I love watching. Then as I got more and more cynical and sort of got in touch with reality, realized it's a business that is sometimes a sport, but it's a business, and you see evidence of that everywhere. And as I mentioned, Jerry Jones is to me prime example. He figured out a way to make money on everything, and they're figuring out a way how to make money now with gambling. I mean, DraftKings is something they never would have endorsed. They have now. I remember one time.
Well, doesn't Kraft own a piece of it?
Yeah, sure. Yes, he does. Yeah, and so and being in a press box, and it was actually with some Raiders writers, and they were telling me that before a game, this was back in the 1990s, before a game, they were playing fantasy football at that time. All right. And so a very, very primitive way of doing it, because they were doing it among themselves, maybe 5 guys and put a league together.
Yeah, to keep your own stats. Dave Muir did that around here in the 90s.
That's exactly right. Keep your stats and keep your sort of interest in it. And some guys said,
every Thursday there'd be a bulletin that was sent out on your AOL, right?
Yeah,
literally.
And so somebody, scored a touchdown, and someone with the Raiders said, "There's gambling in the press box. There is gambling in the press box." These guys go, "We're just not playing." No, there's gambling in the press box. So we've gone from that to now where the NFL embraces it and encourages it and making money off of it. That's the bottom line, making money off of it. And as I said, if there's a revenue generating source out there, they're going to find it and they're going to maximize it, find something else.
Clark Judge has been my friend a long, long time. If you know the byline, you probably know him from Baltimore many, many years ago. He is with Talk of Fame now, and I'll give him a little oxygen to talk about all the cool stuff that they do in regard to, sort of telling the story of National Football League and pro football and his college as it all relates to it. All right, so I'm going to Vegas. I'm wearing a mask. I'm COVID tested and double vaxxed, all that stuff.
Me too.
And I'm hoping the Stones make it to the stage later on this month. We'll get to that too. But I don't know that I'm going to Detroit or Denver or doing all this. And as a reporter, and that's our bread and butter, and I don't want to get too inside the sausage, but the times, they are changing, Clark Judge.
Right,
they are, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's funny. I'd say 5 or 10 years ago, I said to my wife, who was working at the NFL and then left, as you know, she worked at the NFL for 24 years. And
24.
And I said, there's going to come a time when they're going to have, I was looking at the NFL Network, and I said, they're going to have these guys on the NFL Network on screen, but you don't have to go to the site. They'll simply have you hooked up remotely and you can ask questions that way. And she said, I don't see that happening. Well, that's precisely what we've got now with Zoom. And I think everyone, with the exception of the reporters, everyone from the pro football level likes that, because you can manage the questions, you can manage the interviews, maybe not manage the responses, but
I call them hostage videos.
Yeah, that's what they are.
I mean, literally. I mean, sit here, hang, wait, count till 3 or 4 minutes, and then get up and leave. And
and everyone gets the same information. Everyone gets the same information. So the thing that I love most about, especially when I was in San Diego and San Francisco, when I got to hang around those teams and got more and more experience, was what mattered to me was the relationship between the players and myself, or the general managers and myself, who you could trust and they would trust you. It was always a game of trust. And to get that, you had to spend a lot of time out there. And there would be days where I'd be out there 16 hours and not write a thing, but it was about getting their confidence or getting their support or their trust in me, so that the next day when I'd go out there, I knew I had something, and it worked out beautifully. I love it that way. And that's what I think people today miss. To practice every day in San Francisco. I went to practice every day, including Saturday. Now Tuesday, they always have to stay off, but I'd be out there Tuesday, and that got noticed because remember Mike Shanahan was in the offensive coordinator, came down one time about 8 p.m. Tuesday. He goes, "What are you doing here? Well, there's no players." And I said, "I got nowhere to go and I want to be here." He goes, "My God, nobody's out here." But that paid dividends, because the guy around it, this guy's here all the time. He's trying to get stuff. Well, now, you can't, for good reason. They're trying to minimize the COVID, I don't know, the spread of COVID. They're trying to do whatever they can to limit the spread of insidious disease. That I understand, but it's becoming such a staple now, the Zoom call, that you go, I think they kind of like it. They kind of like it. Now, I don't think we should be in the locker room here. Let's just do it. Bring these guys out to the podium and we'll have a Zoom call. That's done across the board. And so I don't have to cover that.
Well, we don't have a lobby for that, right? Like, if the owners all get together over a cigar and think that's a good idea, So it shall be. Like,
That's right.
and
That's right.
that's across all of the four major sports.
Yeah, that's right.
Hockey really didn't have a locker room anyway, nor did the NBA. Like, so when I got closer to covering those things, it wasn't like when I covered the skipjacks in the 80s where I
Wow.
stood over top of
Oh
hockey
yeah.
players in that way and smelled the smells. Covering hockey in the modern era is they bring out whomever they bring out.
Oh, I didn't know that
They're
because
all
as
on
Nestor.
bikes in the back. There's not the same kind of access covering. I covered the Capitals during the Trotz era, and it was very, very corporately differently done. Football is still, before 2 years ago, was still kind of sort of the same.
Yeah.
Baseball, I got thrown out of baseball in '06 by the owner. I've been around it a little bit, enough to realize they don't want to talk to us.
Yeah,
So,
baseball players are always the toughest for me to interview. But it's funny to hear you say that because I'd cover the Stanley Cup out in San Jose when I was out there, and the Sharks would be in it, and we had access to everything out there. I mean, we were in the locker room talking to players. I mean, and before games, after games, and I go back to the 1980s. I would be covering the Celtics Lakers, and had the run of the locker rooms before and after the games. And I remember going into the Sixers locker room before a game, sitting down with Jay, Bobby Jones, and they were great. And then Dr. J would say, I'll see you afterwards. See you after the game. Okay.
you know what?
And
I had the same experience with Julius Erving and with Barkley and Mo Cheeks and those.
yeah, that's great.
I covered the '87 Sixers.
Yeah,
87
right.
7 Sixers, if that makes yeah, and they playing the Bullets and Jeff Ruland and like
Yeah,
all of that. I remember, but that's over, and I
I
think
didn't
it
know
might
that.
be over in football in that way. I'm
Be
not sure.
possible.
Clark Judge is here, Talk of Fame Network. I want to talk Ravens with you. I want to talk chances, not for gambling purposes, strictly as an inducement for fun on Sundays and Mondays. But,
He
this
says
is,
before he goes to Las Vegas.
dude, I'm just going where the game is, man. I'm not even staying in a casino. They might take my press pass. Well, I mean, from a media standpoint, if we gambled on games, they would have thrown us out of the locker room.
Oh, sure. Oh, no question. No question.
Like, there's just no doubt that if I was in Brian Billick's ear to figure out who's injured to bet 50 grand on it this week, that would have been the end of my career. There's no doubt about that. We should, even if you love gambling and all that, we should all be in agreement that as reporters, that was a standard that was there. So it is funny you'd say that, wink, wink. But the Vegas, and Marvin Lewis once said to me, I can't believe people bet on this. Like, the ball moves, you know what I mean? Like, he's like, it's amazing that people bet like lots of money. I thought people inside the game were always wowed by that. And I have a fun Vito Stellino story before we talk Ravens. Can I? Because you were rambling and you were like, I didn't really know how much people wagered on this when I was covering the Chargers and whatever. So 1992, so we'd have no football here. I left the Sun, the previously mentioned Jack Gibbons, who was my sponsor in life, along with John Stedman. And so I left the paper in 92 and became Nasty Nestor. Kenny Albert goes on his way, and I've got to do a show. And it's football season 92. No prayer we're getting a team, right? I mean, none, like in 1992. So Vito's covering the NFL for the Sun, comes in on Friday, and Vito always made his picks, right? On the Sun, and they were legendarily terrible. He didn't pick with the spread. He just picked winners, and he just wasn't good at it, right? So he came in, and I had a guy named Swami who was on the radio with me, who real name should not be mentioned because he didn't like it that way anyway. And Swami liked making football picks, and we did this Friday football frenzy that Dave Muir, who was my fantasy football Cowboys fan, put together. And Swami's sitting with Vito. Now, Swami's just a horse track self-proclaimed degenerate, right? Who's in talking horses, and he's a real gambler, okay? This is a guy that would go out to Vegas, set up shop, and he was a gambler's gambler in that way. So he's in with Vito in this little studio on 5 Light Street that smelled like a sewer. I mean, it smelled like a sewer. So Vito comes on. We got our little microphones. The place smelled like cigarette butts from the 1950s. And this is in 1992. Swami's like, Vito, we got to get the picks, and we got to give me the Lions in 3 this week or whatever. And Vito says, "Do you guys really think people bet on this stuff?" Literally, just like that. And I've lived my whole life in denial. I'm 30 years into this, and I'll go to Vegas and I'll see these New York guys throwing stuff in the casino Sunday when plays go the wrong way. All of that. It's just never been me. It's never been my jam, Rather play blackjack or something. But it is amazing that I'm going to Vegas for this thing. Lamar Jackson running this unconventional offense. We have know nothing about the Ravens right now, right? They haven't been able to put their offense on the field, and tickets are $500 because everybody's coming from far and wide from the Raiders Nation. This is just, I haven't been to a football game where there's been people in 2 years. I mean, every part of this is getting sensory overload for me. But then there's the football part that you and I love so much. How good can the Ravens be? Can they win a championship?
It's a good question. I think it depends on the quarterback you just talked about. I don't know what to make of him, to be honest with you, because I know if and when you fall behind, I'm talking about the Ravens, if and when you fall behind, I think they've got a minimal chance of catching up. And then the reason is because of the quarterback. I look at him as a quarterback who makes a great running back. And yeah, he can throw nice passes. He looks good at times, but I don't trust him. And I never really have as a passer. I know there've been times when people go, look what he can do. And now he's proved all the critics wrong and everything, except every time they fall behind, they can't catch up, and that's, there's a real disparity between someone like Lamar Jackson, and let's just take another Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, guys who can run and throw, and Kyler Murray.
Traditional quarterback.
Well, they're not traditional. I mean, they're out of the pocket making the plays on the run, but they're not run. They're really not run first guys. Kyler Murray is really, I think he's going to, I think he's an accident waiting to happen. He's small, he's going to get hit, and he's going to get hurt. But to me, there's a reason they build a pocket. There's a reason for it. It's not because these guys can't run. It's because they're trying to protect them. And so you look at a guy like Tom Brady, who's 44 now. How has he been able to last so long? Because he can't run, really. He's not a good runner at all. But he's very mobile. And people go, that makes no sense. Yeah, it does, because he's mobile within the pocket. You watch how he senses pressure. He'll duck, he'll move up a couple steps, and he'll make people miss. As opposed to, I remember a guy that his predecessor in New England, Drew Bledsoe, who had no concept of that. Drew Bledsoe is one of the most talented quarterbacks I've seen, but he could never sense where that pressure was coming from. So he'd get blindsided and get hurt. Well,
Elway was the best at that.
No, Elway was tremendous. Yeah,
Elway could move into space to make the play. And it was always when the play broke down. Yep. And it was always because it wasn't great protection. It was great awareness.
Great awareness. Pocket awareness. And it's funny you mentioned that, because someone last year said, they're starting gushing over this throw that Patrick Mahomes made. And they said, have we ever seen anyone like that? Have we ever seen anyone make a throw like that? And I wrote, yeah. John Elway. I saw him do it at Stanford, for God's sake.
By the way, he's over your shoulder, and I see that
yeah, he
storm. I see it over your shoulder.
It's a game I went to. Last game of the 1987 season. They had a blizzard in Denver. I got to that game in the second quarter because all the taxis were gone. They weren't running. And one guy was left. He said, I'll give you a ride, but I can charge you anything I want. I said, I have to go to the game. You charge me whatever you want. From the hotel to Mile High Stadium wasn't that far, maybe a 20-minute taxi ride, and he charged me $50. Well, today that'd be like 100, but still, I was so glad to get there. I walked into the game with my suitcase, because those were the days you flew back with the team. Those were the old days. Flew back with the team after the game, so I had my luggage put on the bus. But yeah, that was in Denver, last game of the season. Chargers, Broncos. I think the Broncos won 24-0. I walked in, and some guy caught a punt and went the other way for Denver. Anyway, that's a long.
I went to the drive game with Phil Jackman.
Oh yeah.
Jackman picked me up that morning. We went to the airport. We flew United. We landed. We went to church downtown, the church right on the square. You know where I'm talking about, right where John Hughes was. And we went in there. They had dog mask, Dixon, Minifield, the whole deal. And Ernie Accorsi got me a ticket on a 50-yard line. Oh. And I sat there and watched John Elway do.
Pick him apart.
Well, yeah, Ozzie remembers that. So does Kevin Byrne. None of the, Art, David, they hated that I was a part of that.
You didn't mention, however, the photo that's below that. Hang on.
Oh, yeah, we're doing props, Clark Judge, are we? Look at this. This is what happens when we get on video. Oh man, is that at Western Maryland or is that at
Yes, it is.
Goucher? That Western Maryland picture.
It's
Okay.
at Western Maryland. It's also signed by John. You can't see it, but he signed it. And then I've got a football here. He signed to me when I was a kid, and he put my name on it, signed. And I've got actually, and Esther, I'll turn this around just so you know where I'm coming from, right there.
Wow, look at that, man. See,
So,
you and I, this is the first Zoom we've done in the modern era. I'm embarrassed I haven't had you on the show. I've been Zooming for maybe about a year and a half, beginning of COVID. So, Clark Judge, tell me what you do at Talk of Fame, because, I mean, you're always, because the Ravens have a lot of guys, you're always getting people like that in. Then we could talk about the Ravens themselves and how it
yeah, no,
relates.
at Talk of Fame Network, I work with two other Hall of Fame voters, Ron Borges, Rick Goslin, who've been doing it for a long time, like I have, and we talk about basically all things pro football related, but generally they're through a Hall of Fame prism, so that we're talking about players past, present, maybe future. You know, is this guy going to be on the Hall of Fame spectrum? Is this a guy that we should be watching in terms of the Hall of Fame? And then people are always interested when somebody retires. They say, well, is he going to the Hall of Fame? And we can tell them why or why not we think he can or cannot, because we've been doing this for so many years. But we used to have a national radio broadcast. We pulled the plug on that for numbers of reasons, which aren't worth going into. And then I did a podcast, and I do a podcast with Ira Kaufman from Tampa, who's a Hall of Fame voter, and we get Hall of Fame guests on, and we're going to get, actually this week, we're getting Tiki Barber to talk about 9/11 in New York. I was in New York then when the planes flew over, and I remember it really well because I lived there. And so we're going to get Tiki.
We just
and
lost the great Jim Fossil too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
When
And
I
then
think
Jim
of
was
9/11, like, oh man.
Jim was a friend, and I said to my wife just last night, Jim Fossil, the perfect guy to get on here. And he lived in Las Vegas. Last time I saw Jim was in Las Vegas, and he came on our Talk of broadcast, and he was great, and that was a shock. But yeah, so I do that, and as I said, the podcast we call the Eye Test for Two podcast with Ira Kaufman and I. But that's what we're doing, and we're having a good time with it.
Clark, I love having you on. Love following all that. I'll get to you and hit you over the head. Like I had Peter King on last week. I didn't even bother him about it. Marshall Yonda, Terrell Suggs, are they in? Are they out? Are they up? Are they down? But for Lamar and for this team and for where the Ravens are, I mean, John's built a nice Hall of Fame sort of profile here if he were to get another win, right? So we have Calais Campbell here at the end, right? So we've got some guys banging around here of that ilk that are reaching for the brass ring, which is, this team's won 25 games the last 2 years. They've been built to be competitive. Now they're going to play without the running back, start the season without the first round draft pick wide receiver. I don't know where the ceiling is for them, but my expectations as I get on the plane, it's been diminished since I started the Crab Cake Tour last month, because this has been a bad month for the Ravens.
Bad month. Yeah. Bad last week. I mean, you lose two running backs, and so that's why I don't know where they stand, because now does Lamar Jackson become your chief running back? Is he your big rushing threat? I don't know the answer to that. You would. I also don't know how secure that defense is going to be. When I think of Baltimore, I think of defense, Tucker, and running the ball. That's I've always thought of them that way, and they can win those 14-10 games against Pittsburgh. That's what I love. Those are my favorite games, because that's football. Those are my favorite games. And people talk about 51-49. If the Rams play the Chiefs, it's not football to me. That's like a computer game, some sort of pinball game. I like that 14 to Pittsburgh. To me, Pittsburgh and Baltimore is the greatest series going. It's just great because they're close games and it's good football. But
I can hear Johnny Unitas' voice saying that's that AFL crap.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what that is.
But it's funny, when you talk about guys in Baltimore, I mean, you didn't mention Art Modell. And Art Modell, I'm on the contributor committee. He was a guy that was considered this week, but he didn't get in. He hasn't gotten in for a long time. And I just feel very strongly that until or unless this board changes, and that's going to be in years, I'm talking about the board of selectors, 49 persons, probably not getting in, because there are a lot of people there who never forget what he did to Cleveland. Well, I'm sorry. We've got other people in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Al Davis, Edward Bennett Williams, Dan Reeves, who moved their teams, Paul Brown. I mean, they move their teams. And so I'm sorry. It's just Paul Brown didn't went to the Bengals, but they moved their team. So they want to hold that against Art Modell. And yet, that AFL NFL merger wouldn't have happened the way it happened without Art. And that's another long story. But again, it was Art who brought in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh wasn't going. The Rooneys weren't going till Dan and Art Rooney visited Art Modell in the hospital in Cleveland. It was a minor surgery. And he said, listen, this makes perfect sense. If you are in the same division with me and Cincinnati, that's what I want. We'll create something here. We'll create rivalries. Let's do it. And Art Rooney convinced Dan it's a good thing, because the teams that were moving, there were 16 teams in the NFL. There were 10 in the AFL. They wanted 3 to move.
Well, the amount of hostility can't be underplayed either.
Oh, no, that's
after
right.
a decade of competing, to think that they could be partners. I mean, this would be like me going in the business of 105.7 or something. You know what I mean? Like, just unthinkable.
Yeah. But then the 3 teams are going to move. We're going to get $3 million each. And then Art Rooney says to Dan, wouldn't you rather make money than lose money? And Dan goes, yeah, I guess so. So they go in with Art Modell and, of course, the Colts were the 3rd team. So it brought that merger together. And I know Dan Rooney, because I was in a meeting with him once, he said, people give us credit. Don't give us credit. The unsung hero was Art Modell. He was the unsung hero who made that happen, because without him, we never would have jumped.
Clark Judge has been my friend a long, long time, telling stories of football, the Talk of Fame Network, and always sort of on point with the current events as well. You can't quit, right? You're going to be watching all weekend, right? You still love it. It's still a great game.
I do. I love watching it. Not as much as I did, I mean, it's like everything else. As time goes on, you find other interests. I know you found other interests, so have I. But yeah, you cannot watch it. I mean, I actually had a weekend 2 years ago where I said, I'm not going to do it. And all of a sudden I'm going, did Brady throw a touchdown pass today? Does anyone know if Brady threw a touch? No, you're supposed to walk away from it. How'd Brady do today? So
yeah, it is incredible what that cat's doing. Whatever genetically engineered thing we haven't caught on to clear the aliens coming down and giving him avocado ice cream. I don't think there's any words left, right? With that, with what he's done here.
No, that's right. Right. Yeah, I'm partial to him too. He's from San Mateo, which is right up the road from where I lived. I lived in Palo Alto, and he came in for a 2000 workout with the 49ers, and they were unimpressed. But I've just marveled at what he's done and continues to do. And it's funny because in past years, and I'm talking about the last 2 or 3 years, I've been on radio shows where they say, well, who would you like to see in the Super Bowl? And I'd say New England. And they go, New England? You gotta be kidding me. Aren't you sick of them? I went, I'm never sick of what Tom Brady's doing, because I love people who are great at what they do. And that's why I marvel at, I showed you these pictures of Unitas. To me, Unitas was the gold standard, and that's a different era. But I loved watching him play and loved being around people who knew about him and knew what made him tick. And the thing that is interesting to me is not so much what they do physically, how they gear themselves up each year mentally to try to get up to that standard again. I don't know how Brady does it. At the age of 44, I don't know why he doesn't just walk away, but he can't. And I do remember Walsh telling me in 2000, and one of the last times I saw Bill, but he said, it's gonna be so difficult for Jerry Rice to walk away. And I said, why do you think that? And he goes, because he can't. He has to keep playing, sort of like a shark has to keep moving. He has to keep playing. We're going to have to let him go at some point. We're going to have to let him go. He won't stop playing. And he didn't until he finally ended up in like Seattle and Denver.
Yeah, places we don't remember the jerseys, no doubt about it. Like Burt Jones, we talked about earlier. Clark, it's been too long. Hope we get together. Press box, elbow, wherever. Pizza in New Haven. I'm down for all of that. Whatever we got to do. All right.
Yeah. Over or under on the Ravens? Oh, never mind. We're not doing the Ravens.
No. Musburg will be on next week. There he goes, Clark Judge joining us here. I am Nestor on behalf of all of our sponsors, including our friends at Wise Markets. Another Wise Conversation. You can find all of our work at a WNST, Towson, Baltimore, where we never stop talking Baltimore positive.